We're always trying to stay safe, and this is a topic that Matt and I kind of talked about with each other in the past, but never really did any research on it. So today we're definitely gonna dive deep and teach you some interesting things.
AirPods, for example, I found out that my AirPods are emitting more EMF than my phone. So what am I going to do about that?
I've been working, told them please don't hit my phone. I'm in my zone, bruh, just leave me alone. Was on the road, but I swear I'm coming home. Now the drinks on me, I think we need a toast. See, I did it for me. Now my old friends calling, told them nothing's for free. Told me time is money, dog, swear I paid all my fees. I was starving for this game, now my family can eat.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Cup of News here at the Cup of Nurses podcast. Got your hosts, Matt and myself, Peter. But first, you could say show keeping or show notes, or what would you call it? Doesn't matter, besides the point. Make sure you guys check out cupofnurses.com. We keep all our show notes there. We keep all our podcasts, all our vlogs. We keep that website up to date. And also, don't forget to check out wearefrontlinewarriors.com for your latest mindfulness and wellness blog posts. And both of those also have shops. We have some cool merch there, and we have some cool merch coming out in the future. We're going to try to update that periodically with just some cool stuff. I just want to thank everybody for listening, for tuning in on our platform, especially YouTube. We're trying to always grow our YouTube audience just because it's more visually appealing. You guys actually see us and see how we actually look. And don't forget to check out our Facebook groups. If you guys don't know where we are or just curious what we are on, you can just Google us, Couple Nurses, and we're going to pop up everywhere on your Google feed. What's up, Matt?
I'm chilling, brother. I'm ready for this awesome jam-packed episode. In today's episode, we're going to talk about electromagnetic radiation, fields, the harmful effects on the human body, and also the current guidelines and what our government is saying, the FCC, about EMF.
We're always trying to stay safe, and this is a topic that Matt and I kind of talked about with each other in the past, but never really did any research on it. So today we're definitely gonna dive deep and teach you some interesting things, because when we think about like EMF or radiation, most of us usually think of like your CT scans or radiation for chemo, not for chemo, but for cancer and just hospital things. And you don't really take into perspective or into account all the radiation and magnetic fields you have literally around you.
Yeah, electronic magnetic frequencies, they're produced with anything that's visible, that's a device, meaning Wi-Fi, cell phone, radio, Bluetooth speakers, our laptops, our lights that are on during our homes. And they're just these invisible lights that are produced when an electron is spinning and being pushed out to create electric charge.
Right, because some of you guys know, you don't need to go to physics to know this, but matter is always being created and destroyed. It doesn't go away. It's always moving around, and electrons are technically in matter. So when you put the light on, you're emitting a light, but you're also emitting electrons, whatever you have plugged in. Everything that is electronical emits electrons. And like we said, matter is never really destroyed. So it's always fluctuating around us, moving back and forth. So this is kind of, like you could say, a really big deal.
Yeah. And one way to think about this is like the human body. We produce energy ourselves, right? And you have somebody that's, for example, anxious. They're producing so much energy in their body, they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to get rid of it. So what do? You start moving around and getting fidgety, you get anxious, you kind of play with your nails. I think that's a great example to kind of think about how these magnetic fields and invisible energies work.
Right. And we're trying to go balls deep into this topic. Matt even bought a EMF radiation tester, you could say, right? So if you guys are on YouTube, you could see this little thing. And Matt's been testing everything in his condo, and I'm gonna be testing everything in mine. And you're just surprised on what puts out high amounts of radiation and things that you don't even expect to put out magnetic radiation or electromagnetic radiation, and it does.
Yeah. So just to kind of get into some details here, the first thing is understanding the electric field, which is produced by voltage. So the devices that we have in the homes, it releases an electronical voltage, and that's the pressure that's used for an electron that goes through the wire. You could think about it as much as water being pushed through a pipe, and that's the voltage that's being emitted, and that is voltage per meter, which is V/M. So that's how we check voltages on this device that we have here. The second thing is a magnetic field, and that's like the flow of currents through wires and electronic devices. And this measurement is through microteslas, which is like a U and a T, or millitons of Tesla. So for this podcast specifically, what we're more fascinated with is the magnetic field. That's through usually devices that have Wi-Fi, cellular devices, or a microwave emits them, and anything that is more than just a regular device like a remote or a TV that's emitting it. In this case here, we have on the podcast platform some AirPods to test.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Or what I learned and I found very interesting is that appliances and electronics, they consistently emit electronic or electric fields. Even like some studies show that our bodies emit electric fields, right? It's where the energy kind of comes from. But magnetic field, that gets emitted when appliances are plugged in. So that's why when we were using this device, this electromagnetic radiation tester, even when we unplugged our appliances, it still gave off an electric field, but didn't give off really a magnetic field because it wasn't plugged in.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, like we tested all our stuff, and things emit a lot of these electromagnetic frequencies, and it's kind of scary because we have some research that we're going to talk about in a little bit, and it's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. So when it comes to these electromagnetic fields, there's two different categories. There's the high frequency EMFs and low to mid frequencies, which is low mid frequencies are usually everything that you see at home, which is your devices, radio waves, little Bluetooth speakers. Those are emitting low to mid frequencies, and it's not really evidence-based to speculate that it produces damage to DNA or anything like that. There's research that we found, but current guidelines say it doesn't. Yeah. But of course, we can't trust the science, as we always say. We got to dig deeper. The other part is the high frequency EMFs. Those are things like Peter mentioned, X-rays, CT scans, MRI, and even gamma rays. So those are actually ionizing radiations, meaning those directly alter the DNA and causes damage. And that's measured by extra hertz. So you know how you have 5G, which is gigahertz? This is extra hertz, which is like 10 to the 18th power. So it's some serious energy that's being emitted. And that's why there's damage. For example, patients that get radiation, they lose hair, or they get leukemia, right? Or they get like low white counts from all that. So that's actually causing direct harm to the body. And we know for a fact those are harmful. That's why X-ray techs and things like that have to keep their distance when they're shooting films. And some even physicians don't want to give their patients X-rays every day or whatever the case might be because it causes harmful effects to the body.
Yeah, like when people take like an X-ray, or even when you're in a CT scanner, they have you way outside the room, right? They have a specially built room, so it diminishes, or you could say decreases the amount of exposure to people that don't want that exposure, right? When you're in a hospital and like you're in the ICU or you get a portable X-ray, the person puts on a special, you could say, kind of uniform that protects them from that radiation. So that basically shows you that, hey, exposure to this kind of radiation is gives you negative effects, right?
Detrimental to your health.
Right. So imagine how much radiation you have flowing around your house.
Imagine if we took this to our next travel contract, we put it on, sort of walking around the unit and seeing what these devices are emitting. People probably think we're crazy, but
imagine, because like even like in an office space or a hospital, you gotta have really good Wi-Fi. Everything has to be kind of synchronized together and like an electronic level, because we have computers, we have all these electronics that make our life easier, but in the long run, it could have some kind of negative effects on us. And I'll be probably curious. Once we go to Texas, we're probably gonna bring this in. We'll probably scope it out, see what happens, because even podcasting here, just using these mics, this computer, we're getting bombarded with these frequencies. And yeah, Matt's putting it on right now. Look at that. It's thick. That's a lot. It keeps going up.
This microphone is emitting 250 volts per meter of electricity.
And usually this would beep to show that's harmful, but we turn off the volume. And people, and this is invisible kind of stuff, so it's hard to kind of keep track of, and you can't see it, right? So you're not really sure how much you're being exposed to it. Some people live under power lines. They live next to like certain factories that create energy. Imagine how much exposure they're getting without even knowing it. And it's not something that's probably spoken about because You don't want to deter somebody from not buying a house because it's located next to a generator, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to scare people because their home is under power lines. But this is something that we should take into consideration because there isn't a whole lot of research on it. And as we grow as a society, as humans, we create more wireless technologies and become more dependent on these things that emit this kind of radiation. And it's kind of scary to think about where it could be in the future.
It makes me kind of think with like, not Tesla, what's his name? Elon Musk, because we want to get so synced up and be more cyborgish, right? But, that's cool and all. We can have all these functionalities, but what is the long-term effects of that? What, it's not measured or anything like that. And keep in mind that our Earth actually releases natural magnetic energy as well. It actually has its own electromagnetic field. And that's why when you have a compass, the needle's pointing north or whatever direction it actually is emitting that frequency. So we talked about ionizing radiation, and we know that it's harmful to the human bodies, and it causes hair loss, skin damage, tissue damage to the bone marrow, etc. And you shouldn't be around it. And if you're pregnant, you shouldn't be around CT scans or get MRIs and all that. So what are the actual studies linking to the damage? So right now, it would be unethical for human studies to zap them with radiation or keep them in EMF environments to see what are the long-term implications of it. Later on in the studies, we'll talk about some mice studies that we found and things like that, which are showing positive results, meaning it is damaging when it comes to low to mid frequencies, because we only know for a fact that the high frequencies are causing damage. So definitely it's going to... One thing that I think that you mentioned before the show is that we stopped funding this research, right?
Yeah, so I actually looked up because it was hard for us to find like research about this, because especially cell phones, like when they came into the public sphere in like the 1980s, people understood that this kind of radiation is detrimental to us, but yet they still kind of allowed cell phones to exist, and cell phone towers are being built everywhere. And it was really interesting to look at that the FCC actually, and the government and the FCC actually stopped funding research for the exploration of the impacts of like cell phones that uses radiation and the effects on your health. So that's why we don't see a lot of studies like this, because it's not governmentally funded. So if you want to explore the detrimental effects of, let's say, cell phone use on the human brain or human body or cancer or anything like that, you have to be privately funded, which is kind of counterproductive if you're trying to really find out the true science and the facts, right?
And to protect the humans.
Yeah, and plus, like, I'm sure lobbyists are also involved in this kind of stuff, which are probably against this kind of funding, because if you see in a hospital that, hey, we need protection towards this kind of radiation, then why don't you think that we might need protection from radiation related to like cell phone use and stuff? And the only study that they really funded was regarding the heat produced from like AirPods and electronics, because if you guys remember years and years ago, like sometimes these phones would overheat and they would explode and they would cause damage. They wouldn't always explode, but they were relating that damage caused by heat was seen to be harmful, and that's what they kind of proved. So now there is a regulation on how hot and how warm your phone could get, or your AirPods or appliances. And even like your laptops and MacBooks and cell phones, when you use them a lot or you're watching a movie, they get warm. So, but there's like certain mechanisms that like this, you can say disallow from your phone from overheating, and that's kind of what they funded and what they saw as detrimental. But the radiation, the visible stuff coming out of this, no one's really looking into, because imagine how detrimental it would be to technology and society if we found that overexposure to cell phone use or the radiation emitted from cell phones is shown to be detrimental. That would kind of put technology almost, it would flip it upside down, and we wouldn't be putting it right in a back burner. Or imagine creating or imagine regulating it where Apple would have to create some kind of a cover or a casing for cell phones to not emit this kind of radiation. But that's to make things really difficult, because you're trying to make this wireless. And the way the wireless things communicate is also through this kind of radiation, which is mind-blowing.
Which is releasing the micro Teslas that we'll talk about. And let's also keep in mind that there is no real life scenario, or in the real life scenarios, we're being exposed to multiple sources of EMF radiation. you have your laptop, you have your AirPods next to you, you have your cell phone, your light is producing something, you got a microwave there. There's multiple fields of radiation that's affecting us, and there's no studies to show what a multiple sources have effects on biological beings.
Right.
The studies that we looked at, there's only one source of EMF that's being transmitted that could be causing damage.
And the one that you presented here that you found on cancer.gov that actually looked at power lines and exposure to childhood and its ties to leukemia. And you found some pretty drastic stuff, right?
Yeah, so this childhood study, it was 9 studies that reported a 2-fold increase in childhood leukemia among kids that were exposed to 0.4 microteslas or higher. And the other meta-analysis was 15 studies that showed a 1.7-fold increase in childhood leukemia among children that were exposed to 0.3 microteslas or higher.
And this was like exposure. So they looked at exposure in their home because that's usually the place where children spend the most time, and specifically their bedrooms. So it's crazy that if you have this radiation that equals 0.4 million Tesla volts, whatever it's called.
Microteslas.
You could say. I'm no electrician or expert on this, but it's saying that if your room is exposing you to 0.4 microteslas, your chance of leukemia or your kid's chance of leukemia increases times 2. And if it's at 0.3, it's 1.7 times higher, which is crazy because people don't know about this and this is invisible. And I haven't heard anything like this on the news. You know, we scanned our AirPods and it emits the same thing, if not more.
Yeah.
Right? And imagine people that wear AirPods all day. They have them in 24 hours, like 24 hours the majority of the day. They're exposed to it nonstop. Or our cell phones, we keep this cell phone in our pocket all the time. We're getting exposure. And this was showing that just 0.4 microteslas does the damage where it causes literally cancer for kids.
Yeah, and right now during the show, I have this electromagnetic meter next to my cell phone, and there's instances that it's going to emit 1.2, sometimes 1.3. So it's varying based on what's going on. But that just puts you into perspective that you have kids that are young that are constantly holding this iPad, this phone for hours on because, let's face it, it's easier to have your kid looking on YouTube for a couple hours and taking care of them and playing them with their toys, or you playing with them. So imagine the long-term effects that we have on this radiation.
Right. Yeah, because this literally we have radiation emitting from my pocket all the time, and even the AirPods were even worse than the cell phones.
Yeah. So that's the next thing I'm going to check here.
The AirPods were wild, and you know, give your AirPods to kids that are developing, still growing, and they get hit with all this radiation. Like Apple's so clutch. It's actually trying to connect to Matt's AirPods with my phone right now. But imagine this, like
1.3 to 0.9, I got 1.1 microteslas being emitted right now.
Yeah, crazy.
And the kids in the studies, it was 0.4.
Yeah, that's wild. So imagine you trying to calm your kid down, and the kids, you know, he calms down once you put a music on or some videos for them to watch, and you put these AirPods in them, and they get hit with this giant radiation. What is that, 4.5? That's crazy.
When I took it out, I'm capturing 1.43 microteslas right now.
Yeah. See, that's a lot. That's wild. And I know that these studies show that exposure over a 24-hour period, but this is 4 to 5 times the exposure or the amount of microteslas that these kids were exposed to that got leukemia. And that's insane. And this is just we're becoming a more of a wireless world, so it's only going to get probably worse and worse. And like you said, Elon Musk wants to implant like chips in our brain. Imagine how much radiation that's going to emit, and that's directly to your neurons, to your brain tissue. So you never know what's going to happen, and no one wants to study this because, like I said, if this is going to be shown as detrimental, we're going to just stop technology. You know, it's not how it works. It's kind of crazy.
And yeah, that's interesting to see like what's going on to our health regarding this. So, you know, regarding the FCC, they were only checking thermoregulation, which has effects on the body where if you have a hot brain on one side, it might affect something. We don't know exactly what, but we can speculate. I mean, if you think about it, all our neurons are electrical conduction systems, and they create these. I'm missing my neurology knowledge right now, but it creates whatever conduction sparks of electricity to create memory and responses when it comes to the muscles and everything. So imagine what's happening to EMFs that are close to the brain. Is it, destroying our axons? Is it ruining the myelin sheath where it's not being able to conduct electricity as good because of this magnetic radiation? We just don't know, and it's not being funded to study.
Yeah, and it's crazy. And then also look at the electronics that you have by you when you sleep. Your cell phone usually by you. Maybe you have like an Alexa, like some kind of Google Home or whatever they have nowadays. Like that's all emitting radiation when you're sleeping. So you might be like, yeah, I'm not on my phone a lot during the day. But guess what? When you put that phone down, it's next to your head when you're sleeping, or your charger's there, or whatever electronic you have there. You get that exposure too. People don't think about that. They think about just like whatever they carry on themselves. But when you sleep, guess what? You're around those electronics as well, and that's even scarier.
So I'm going to go over some random facts that we found from the internet that's potentially linking EMF to disease. And the reason being we say potentially is because we can't for a fact say certainly that this is the issue. So science is, sometimes behind, but it's interesting because there's things that I believe, for example, from like a spiritual standpoint, or maybe it's a little bit woo, right? But I believe into it and I know its effects. So that's a dilemma with science, that just because we can't measure things, that doesn't mean it's a myth or we should completely discredit it. It just means that we need to find better instruments to measure whatever. Just like the study of epigenetics, look how long it took us to finally map our sequence. So one thing here is that EMFs have been reported to suppress melatonin production in the pineal gland. As a result, what happens is there's a reduced concentration of melatonin, which results increased procalcitonin. When the pituitary gland does this, it increases estrogen and testosterone released by the gonads. Based on this finding, we can hypothesize that the magnetic field increases the risk of certain hormone-dependent cancers, such as breast cancer and prostatic carcinomas. Makes sense. If you think about it, your pocket is always next to your damn sack.
Right. Yeah. And what's crazy to think about or interesting to look at is like your body is basically fighting off cancer nonstop because your cells replicate so much and so often that there's always miscommunications or like misreplications. So when cancer happens, it's basically due to like misreplication of your cells that become cancerous and they grow instead of your good cells. So like the key thing to take away is try to expose yourself to like a least amount of, you could say, cancer causing things in life as possible, and that's going to decrease your chances because your body does have like a safety mechanism. It has telomeres and things like that. But just like looking at anything else, the more exposed you are to a negative thing, the more likely it is for you to happen. Yes. And what we looked at too is that there has been a 30% increase in cancer from 1973 until 2015 when this study was looked at. And we're not saying that it's due to increase in cell phone use or increase in appliances, but I'm sure those are applicable to these scenarios because it's something that we've been using more and more as time goes on. And diet, exercise, and all that does contribute to cancer, but I'm sure so does this kind of magnetic and electronic radiation that we're exposed to more and more frequently.
100%, man. There's also another thing that says the movement of these electrons because of these EMFs, they might damage the DNA, so the DNA gets induced from an electronic standpoint and because of this induction, it produces guanine radicals, which upon reaction with water actually causes oxidative DNA stress. Another one showed exposure to EMFs caused human primary fibroblasts at only 50 hertz, which was measured at 1.0 microteslas, caused slight but significant increases in DNA fragmentation. So, I don't know what the definition of DNA fragmentation exactly is.
But I think you want that happening, right?
But you don't want that happening. And it makes a lot of sense where, if you think about it, we have our own electromagnetic field. We're beings of chemical reactions. And just like you say, we're exposed to so much already environmental stresses. And this is another mechanism that's causing problems. In 2017, there was a Lai and Xing, which observed genotoxicity effects in these fields. This was more on rats, which was only up to 60 hertz. And if you think about it, 5G is 5,000 hertz. So that's so much more exposure.
It's crazy. We should probably drop by some 5G towers and see what the hell is going on.
Or stand by with this thing.
Yeah, because it's scary. Even regular radio towers, like this stuff is shown to be detrimental. It just, there's not a lot of research on it because I feel like people are scared to report on it because it would hinder science almost and technology.
And all that money from big tech companies. So that study actually showed that the increased DNA strand breaks in brain cells in a dose-dependent fashion, which means it indicated clastrogenic effects. And clastogen is a substance that causes and breaks in chromosomes as a result of a loss or rearrangements of chromosomal segments.
Yeah, some shit.
Deep in the sauce, man. I wish we had somebody like with like a physics degree so we could explain more about this magnetic field.
Yeah, maybe one day. And what's crazy is like we check that Matt's microwave, and even when you unplug it, it still emits this radiation. And same with all other electronics. So it's crazy to think about how much of this you're surrounded by. And imagine in schools where your kids are, how much electronic exposure they have over there too. Because like I said, same in the hospital, we have a lot of computers. Same in school, a lot of computers, a lot of it's electronic based. A lot of Wi-Fi signals going out because you need a good connection. So imagine their exposure. They come home, and man, it's like crazy because I'm curious because some of my friends lived next to like a power grid or whatever or generator. So I'm kind of curious on how much like volts their house just had just by being so close to it. Because I'm not sure, we didn't look into this, but I'm not sure there's like a guidelines on how far you have to be away from it. But no one really tells you, hey, there's a power generator X amount of meters away from you, and nobody really talks about it. It's crazy because, like I said, people probably wouldn't buy homes next to them.
And I was actually looking at that. There's only 2 states that have any regulations. Right now, there's no U.S. federal legal limits when it comes to the exposure to magnetic fields. 2 states, which is Florida and New York, which limit public exposure through overhead lines for 150 mg, which is equivalent to 0.15 microteslas.
Right. So that right there shows you that, hey, if the government or the state's limiting this exposure, then obviously they know that has some kind of detrimental effects, which is not widely talked about, like a lot of things in society, unfortunately, man. But the calcium channel stuff that you looked at,
let me back that up because I had made an error there.
Oh shit.
So 1 mg is actually equivalent to 0.1 microtesla. So if we have 150 mg, that's actually 15 microteslas.
Damn.
That's way above the limit. And those are for power headlines. So you don't want to be next to those lines.
Right. And 0.4 microteslas were associated with an increase in leukemia in kids. Damn. That's crazy, dude.
And so in 2009, I found a paper published from the Columbia University that described how these EMFs activate cellular stress responses, and it penetrates cells' nucleuses and it interacts with the DNA. So I'm just going to go in through the process steps of how EMF causes oxidative damage in the cells. As you know, oxidative stress is not good because it causes free radicals. Free radicals is literally like it's a radical which has a missing electron. All it wants to do is just go hit something to have another electron. But in this case, it causes more damage. So EMFs enter the cell. Our cell activates ROS, which is a reactive oxygen species. And it generates antioxidative mechanisms, which tries to regulate ROS, and it's trying to protect the cell membrane. Too much ROS is generated, which impairs oxidative mechanisms, which can lead to many other diseases. This membrane is compromised. EMF can now enter the cell's nucleus. The EMF breaks DNA strands, which damage cells and can lead to cancerous tumors. The stress response increases heat shock stress proteins, which is another protein that's actually protecting you from heat, and it regulates like the cell's core temperature.
So it increases the free radicals basically in your system?
Yes.
Yeah, and with free radicals, I'm sure you guys know that that's the number one cancer-causing thing is free radical. That's why we have something called antioxidants, which it's still kind of 50-50 of their effectiveness, but supposedly antioxidants are supposed to decrease this oxidative stress and get rid of these free radicals because they're able to kind of bond with them, and you can kind of say that it deactivates those electrons. And it's crazy because we know that free radicals directly cause cancer. So it's wild. So this is causing free radicals, which one could speculate that it's going to cause cancer eventually.
Yep. Well, yeah, it all bothers me so much where people think like, again, back to the government has its best interests in mind. It does, but there's also so much lobbying power that affects this. If you're Apple, if you're Comcast, whatever it is, you just got to throw some money in there so nobody funds this kind of research. Because if they do, it could affect your business, right?
And we're not saying, get rid of all your electronics, go live in a mountain somewhere or forest. We're saying try to limit this because, like I said, our body has its own defense mechanism on battling cancer, and you could say battling cells that aren't supposed to be where they are or grew the wrong way. It has its own mechanism, but you don't want to kind of overwork this where there's so much cells that can cause cancer where your body kind of gets overpopulated with them, and then it leads to cancer. You kind of want to limit that kind of stuff. Same way you limit junk food in your diet, same way you want to eliminate this radiation exposure. Be careful with where you walk and kind of how wireless you could say your house is and where you live.
Right. And one example is like AirPods, for example. I found out that my AirPods are emitting more EMF than my phone. So what am I going to do about that? Well, I used to be in the kitchen, listen to podcasts and cook, grill, walk around the house with an AirPod or two in my head.
Shame.
Exactly. So now I'm going to wear a wired headphone when I'm around the house where I could simply put my phone in my pocket. If I'm out of the house or I'm at the gym, I cannot stand a damn wire. So I'm still going to wear my AirPod. I'm not going to throw away the $250 pair of headphones. So just limit the exposure where your body has a maybe chance to reboot or clean itself up from the oxidative stress or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, or if you're at home, use a speakerphone. If you're making a call, put the phone on the counter, like walk away from it a little bit and just put on speakerphone so you can still communicate. Same with music, just put on speakerphone. And if you're in a store, I know, they say don't be rude by going on speakerphone, but when I'm at a store, I use FaceTime, and I don't put my AirPods in. I just, casually FaceTime somebody in mid-store. Yeah, it might be annoying to somebody, but it's like, is that really big of a deal? It's not like you're following up the same person throughout the store and you're FaceTime next to them. It's just kind of sometimes you got to be a little selfish and think about yourself sometimes. And FaceTime might be a better option than putting that cell phone next to your ear.
Yeah. Less about the collective, more about the individual, right?
Yeah.
That's what our Constitution says.
Yeah. Or even when you're in a car, you have those dashboard clips that you could clip your phone to. That's probably a better option than keeping it in your pocket or keeping it to like the right of you where your cup holder is. You're probably better off getting one of those cell phone holders that attach to your dash than keeping it in your pocket.
I used to put my phone on airplane mode before bed all the time because it was so close to me, and that made me feel better because I was aware of EMFs. But as you get busier and busier in life, like there's phone calls that you don't want to miss or something like that, and you just need to have your phone on.
But does it decrease by a lot? Let me put my phone in airplane mode, see if it makes a difference if you think about it. Let me turn off Bluetooth, everything, minimize the screen.
Well, you would have to. What we have to do is first test it without. But you right now,
so you have the cell phone, just do yours because you have the same cell phone. Not the same cell phone number though.
So right now I'm emitting 0.3, 0.4 microteslas randomly. Let's see, I'm doing the front of my phone, 1.8, or I should say 0.8.
Yeah, still dangerous
0.4. Go ahead and do that. As you're going to talk, what's interesting is I found also studies about EMFs and how they affect the volt-gate calcium channels.
I'll be honest with you, it's anywhere from 0.3 to 0.6 microteslas. So,
are you in airplane mode?
Yeah. Sounds
so
like
it's still admitting things.
Oh, yeah. 0.99, that one was. Yeah. Look for yourself.
Still dangerous.
Whoever's on YouTube right now, you can check it out. So, damn. Whoa. 1.6. Interesting.
And radiation is going to fluctuate, which is based on, I don't know what apps are consuming your cell phone usage during that time. So one thing that's interesting here is calcium signaling in membranes surrounding your cells. So EMFs were actually able to stimulate the voltage gate. So it can force the calcium channel sensor, which detects electrical charges, and open up the gate in the cell membrane. So as you know, you have, potassium channel, sodium, and all these things that open and allow things to happen. So EMFs are actually able to allow these sensors to stay open. It crosses right through the cell membrane, and it could cause damage there. One thing that it does, it actually increases intracellular calcium, and it also increases nitric oxide into the cells. So as you know, nitric oxide has some health benefits such as stimulating bone growth and increasing calcium but too much of it actually becomes super oxidized. So it causes something, peroxide nitrate. This is a big deal because it's actually a potent non-radical oxidant, and it breaks down to many different free radicals, which causes, as you know, damage and can lead to chronic diseases. One interesting fun fact is, it's not a correlation, but autism is connected with excessive amounts of intracellular calcium. So what happens to maybe women that are pregnant that are exposed to long exposures of EMFs? Because we don't know how these environmental toxins are affecting us, including our baby. It's just not studied. Right. And of course, it's going to be hard to be studied because it's not ethical. We would have to first, get pregnant rats in a controlled environment and see when the rat makes the baby, what happens to. Can even rats have autism though?
Probably.
I have no idea. That I don't know. I'm sure.
Autism.
Autism, yeah. I'm sure we could find a genetically modified rat that could be exposed to autism. I'm sure they could figure out some shit, man.
Yeah. And real quick, I also tested the radiation on my phone was turned off, and it does still emit a little bit of radiation even when it's off, which is crazy.
And that's one thing you mentioned earlier in the show, that even though your microwave is unplugged, it's still releasing electric fields and magnetic fields. Or no, just electric fields.
Yeah.
So we're not scientists to know exactly what the devices have inside of them that cause this, but clearly it still does.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's crazy. And we carry this thing with us all the time, and it even shows when it's off. It still can be somewhat detrimental to you.
And getting into some guidelines for EMFs. So just like we said, there's a lot of disagreements between scientific literature whether low to mid EMFs actually are cancer causing and whether it's actually causing damage to the human health. And if so, how much? We're not sure. As far as the current International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, there was an evaluation in 2011 that potentially linked RF radiation to cancer in people, particularly glioma, which is a malignant type of brain cancer.
Yeah.
So that was the only correlation so far that they have found. There is conclusions that there's risks. If you go to your cell phone about, I think there's a RF exposure section there, and it tells you about the exposure.
Yeah. I did a little bit of digging if AirPods could play a role with people that have headaches or migraines. And even though I didn't put in the show notes, I did skim over some stuff that there's a few people that when they decreased their use of AirPods and headphones, their actually headache kind of went away. But now that I'm thinking, were they playing music the whole time, and was it a volume that was causing the headache or whatever? But either way, it showed that by putting those AirPods away or listening to it less, it decreased their headache. So if you're someone that's prone to headaches and stuff, maybe you shouldn't put AirPods in as often. Maybe if you want to listen to meditation or something kind of music or sounds that you could say help alleviate your headache, maybe you should use your phone on speakerphone or you just the TV instead of those AirPods. And
so far, when it comes to regulations, we found the Building Biology Institute recommended only 0.1 microteslas of a maximum exposure, which is the magnetic field, in your sleeping areas. So if you're sleeping, just be cognizant of what is around. If you have a TV by you, a laptop, put that away. If it's your phone, put some distance away from it. I have actually a Alexa that's next to me, so I literally put this on and it was at 50 millivolts.
All right, there Alexa, you go.
Stop.
Always listening.
She's always up to something.
And when you want to ask her something, she ignores it. But times like this, where she's not supposed to be listening, she's listening. You gotta be careful with those things.
I'm gonna give her a different name. I'm gonna call her Monica for the show. So
you know
Monica,
why? That's why they give her a female voice, because women always be listening, dude. And that's why Alexa sounds like a female, not a dude. All of them standard, because women always listening. Do the same with these things.
Let us know if that's true. So I have a Monica next to my my little stand in the bed, and I actually was checking this meter to see how far I have to be, because I think that the current guidelines is it recommends 10 to 20 volts per meter maximum in your home and offices. It goes way above if you have your laptop and it's just there. And when it comes to the sleeping arrangement, 5 volts max. So I literally, this thing was 50 by my left side of the bed. I had to go towards the middle where it was only 3 to 1. So I might move my bed a little bit further when I'm sleeping tonight.
Yeah, and this could be a benefit for somebody that snoozes their alarm a lot. If you put your phone further away from you and then you got to get up and turn it off, that's not only going to benefit you by decreasing the amount of radiation exposure you're going to have, but it's also going to help you wake up and not snooze, because once you're up already out of bed, you're less likely to go back and go back to sleep, right? Because once you stand up, who wants to go back, lay down?
Yeah.
Unless you're really stubborn. But then you should probably work on other things.
And there's no regulations as far as the FCC or United States federal branches for this, but I found a scientific panel in Norway that recommended the 0.1 max microteslas in your environment and sleeping arrangements, because they concluded that exposure limit actually puts you at risk for leukemia, brain tumors, Alzheimer's, ALS, sperm damage, and damage strained breaks from the DNA.
100%. Like, we should look at the research. If you're consistently exposed to a 0.4, it increases your chance of leukemia times 2 if you're a child. If you're exposed to 0.3, it increases it by 1.7. So it makes sense that 0.1, probably over long periods of time, is also going to be detrimental in some kind of a way. It might not give you leukemia, but it might give you those headaches. It might give you those other issues that Matt talked about. You just got to be careful. Like, we cannot live without modern technology, but doesn't mean that it always has to be around you. It doesn't mean you always have to be in it.
Yeah, there's also something called like EMF protectors where, and I don't know how well they work. We didn't have a chance to purchase them, and maybe we could do like a little follow-up episode on this for the protectors, or maybe get somebody on the show from the company if they're that good. But supposedly, and I bought one for my parents at home. I just haven't had time to test it. But supposedly what it does, if you have a Wi-Fi router and it's emitting EMF radiation, somehow this device channels the EMF radiation and turns into a more healthy frequency, more of a natural frequency that, let's just say, Earth emits. It wouldn't take away all of the frequencies that these devices are emitting, like your cell phone and Wi-Fi, because then it would completely cut the...
It wouldn't work.
Yeah, it would cut the connection, the signal, there we go, that's what I was looking for, to whatever you're trying to do. So whether they work, I'm not sure. I know I looked at a couple websites, but it's their own blog posts from the companies that are saying good things about it. We definitely have to do more research.
Yeah, and if you guys want to buy one of these, maybe this EMF, these electromagnetic radiation tester, we could probably pop Amazon link in the show notes, just in case you want to check your house, especially if you live next to power lines or a generator, or you just want to check out your office space and complain to your boss that you're getting, headaches because too much radiation. You could probably buy one of these.
Yeah, it's for sure a health hazard.
It's about the size of an iPhone. Would you say iPhone 10?
Yeah, and in 1986, the FCC made some regulations on it, and we talked about the thermal regulations, so I don't want to get back into that. But that was their only consideration when it took the effects of EMF. And then 2011, they did a follow-up, and they basically didn't make any changes based on technological advances. And one thing to keep, which is interesting, is the way they check this. They check EMF radiation based on 2 or more inches. That's like the distance that they use for cell phones and all that. But let's not keep in mind that it's called a laptop. It's literally sitting on your lap. It's a cell phone that we're completely holding freaking
In our
hands to. I wanted to use a word, I couldn't get it.
Paw?
They literally palm to hand there, right? So our own regulatory bodies aren't following up on literature and research for the harmful effects of this. And just like I mentioned earlier, not even multiple sources of EMFs and what are the harmful effects.
Yeah. They're kind of, how science can kind of be bent towards one way. This is kind of almost bending it towards one way, because 2 inches, when the hell, your phone isn't 2 inches away from your hand. It's literally in your hand. When you're talking on your cell phone, it's next to your ear, to your brain. So it's like crazy to kind of look at this and actually pay attention to how they do these trials and these recommendations and regulations, because sometimes they're not always driven in the best manner, you could say.
Yeah, and even the comparison between different types of humans. The FCC is saying it's safe, but what is a 200-pound man that's freaking full of mass and his skull is bigger versus a child? They deserve the same exposure? Why isn't there no regulations on that?
Right.
When I looked at different countries, I think France banned, for example, Wi-Fi's in kindergartens. Why can't we get a little bit more ahead of the curve and see what we can change to protect our kids?
Right.
And the only thing, last point here, that's maybe groundbreaking or that's a positive news on this is in August 13th of 2021, the U.S. court appealed against the FCC and favored Children's Health Defense in a 2-1 panel decision, calling the FCC to reevaluate its wireless radiation exposure standards. Yeah. So that's the latest news on that, where the U.S. court challenged that, but we'll see what they do as far as testing or changing those regulations. Stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think about while we're podcasting, we're getting exposed to high amounts of radiation. So this is what we're doing for you guys. Not only spreading knowledge, but also doing detrimental stuff to our bodies.
Putting ourselves on the front line. All right, guys, thank you everyone for tuning in to this jam-packed episode about EMF radiation, the harmful effects to the human body. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. If you guys do and find value in this podcast, slap some 5 stars on the show. Give us a comment. Give us some love in the comment section. We appreciate that. It motivates us to keep on producing high-quality content. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Peace.
Bye-bye.